So today we're going to be looking at the art module in our Visual CAD/CAM 2017 product. So the art module is one of the modules offered in Visual CAM, which allows you to take raster geometries like bitmap image files or JPEG files or GIF files, and you can turn them into either vectors, and you can create relief operations with it. So this is available in our standalone Visual CAD/CAM system. So to load the art module, once you have Visual CAD/CAM loaded, you click on the Visual CAM menu and then you pick art from the menu here, and this will automatically switch the interface from the CAM interface, the mill browser if you're in the mill module, to the art browser. Okay?
Okay.
Now there's two main tabs. So this also uses a browser interface. The workflow is very similar, and the interface is pretty similar. The workflow is how you've been used to using our other products. So we have two main tabs: relief operations, and then we have raster to vector operations. Now the relief operations allows you to create 3D reliefs where you can basically take an image and convert the entire image into a 3D relief. You could also select vector geometries like curves, lines, arcs, and create puffed and swept volumes as well. So these are relief created using vector geometries. Now you can also take native geometries like solid surfaces, and you can turn them into a relief like a mesh geometry. You can convert a native geometry as well. So there are several tools available in here in the relief operations tab. And the raster to vector operations tab allows you to take an image, convert a raster geometry to a vector geometry. So first, we'll take a look at a raster to vector process, and then we'll go ahead and also look at the relief process. Do you have any questions so far?
No, it looks straightforward.
All right, so under the raster to vector tab, we have the option called create curves from image. I'm going to select this. I'm going to go look for an image file. So I have several image files in here, and I'm going to pick one of these images. So let's say we want to start out with the rhinoceros logo in here. I'm going to select that and I pick open. So this basically displays the vector operation dialog. You can specify a name or use the default name on it, and this shows your original image, and this is the conversion into a black and white format. You can always adjust these threshold in here. You can set the threshold criteria right there, as you can see. You can adjust it, and you can also specify additional threshold, like you can filter on to remove certain colors out. You can do that as well. And if you go to the Vector Edits tab, you can specify to use the image size, or you can input your own size and dimensions. So you can either input them in the width and the height, or you can use the pick option and use the snap tools in here, where I could snap this to a certain size in here. So I can pick two corners, like picking two corners of a rectangle to select that. So that basically establishes the size, shows the insertion point. You can also specify a resolution in here. So I could specify like a 125 or 150 or whatever resolution that you like to put in here. And finally, you hit generate. So this basically takes that vector raster geometry and converts it into a vector. You can see that some of these lines in here, they look jagged, right? You can go back and edit these, and you can further refine it. You can tighten up the curve fitting tolerance and then pick generate, and you'll notice that that looks even more finer or smoother on it. So once you have these created, you can select it and then click on export curves to CAD. So this basically converts the raster geometry that you converted to a vector in art into the host CAD system, which is in this case Visual CAD. So these can be used for operations. If you just want to engrave on these curves, you can switch to the mill browser to engrave it, or if you want to generate a relief from it, you can go to the relief operations tab and create a relief. Now in addition to creating the vector from the image file, we could also create curves using the drawing tools that you have in Visual CAD. So for example, I could be creating a rectangle in here. I could also throw in like a rounded rectangle, so I can create geometries in here. So I can specify like a radius around it to create these additional geometries. You can also add some text to it as well. Now, the Relief Operation tab, the first step here is you need to define a project. This is like your workspace or like a canvas that you're defining. So I can use the pick origin and extents, and I can pick 2 corners to represent the size of my project. So I have it set to 3 by 4. I can specify a resolution in here. I'm just going to go with 100 dots per inch, and then I'll pick Generate. So what it did was it created a project workspace, and I can build the relief on top of this. Now, we have the curves that we created from the raster vector process, and now we also added some additional curves in here. So we could take advantage of the relief tools. One of the tools I would like to use is the create puffed volume. So I'm going to use this tool, and I could choose from these different cross-section types in here, and I'm going to select the very first cross-section. I can specify a height for the puff. I'm going to set a maximum puffing height in here, so I'll put in 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to say I want to add it to this project. So if you click on the type, you'll notice that it gives you the different samples in here, what you can accomplish with add or subtract or unite high, unite low. So these are the different scenarios or examples you can create. So I'm going to use add, and I can specify a smoothness factor in here, and then go to the relief operations and pick a border. So in this case, I would like to puff this border. You can right click on it to accept it, and now I pick generate. You will now notice that it creates a puffed volume of the rounded rectangle I drew, and it applies it to the relief.
Okay, so if, for one quick question, so if I'm using, for example, 1/2 inch material, I would select, say, a 1/4 inch puff, so it's going to go halfway into the material and puff to the surface?
Yeah, the maximum puff height what you're putting in is a 1/4 inch, so which means the highest point will be at about 1/4 inch, and then gradually it varies based on the curve geometry that you selected for the puff operation. So what you're putting in here is the maximum puff height. At the peak, the maximum height will not exceed a 1/4 of an inch.
Okay.
Now if you want to change this from an add to a subtract and then generate it, it's going to basically create a negative as it creates it with the puff result with the project. So now when you select the project, you'll notice that it creates a cavity as opposed to having it, like bulged up on the top, right?
Right.
So now you created one of the puff operations. You can go ahead and create additional operations in here. So now I'm going to choose a second operation. I'm going to add on top of it. And for the relief curves, I'm going to remove the ones that are selected and go pick the borders. So for the borders, I'm going to pick these closed shapes. And for the detail curve, I could either select closed or I can be selecting open shapes. I can select them and again specify the parameters. I can pick my cross sections. I can change my cross section in here and then select generate. So you'll notice that now the image that you used for raster to vector operation, you selected those geometries, the curves, and created a puff operation, and now the resulting project will show that the image is now puffed and it goes on top of the puff operation of the rounded rectangle, right? So in this case, we did a subtract for the first puff, and then we did an add, so you can see how it emerges and produces a result for you.
Okay.
Now, if you also want to add some text in here, I can go into, the curve modeling tab. I can create a text, and I can specify a text. I'm going to use the word art, and I can select one of these font types in here. I'll just pick one of these fonts, give it a height, like a 0.3 inch, and now I can place it wherever I'd like to. So I'm going to place these text in here. Now with these created, I can also sweep them. I can use a sweep operation in here, and I can specify the different cross sections. I'm going to reduce the scale in here for the sweep. I can adjust the scale as well. As you can see, the scale factor can be set, and you can choose whether you want to add, subtract, or unite. I'm going to add it, and now I'll go to relief operations and select these as my borders, and I can choose if I want to fill inside. So sweep basically sweeps on both sides of the curve, and now I pick generate. So this would create a puff operation for these curves right in here. So you can edit the operation. You can always make changes to it. You can change the cross section. You can change the parameters, what you're selecting. Pick from one of these cross sections in here and then generate. And now you'll notice that it adds that relief on top of it.
Oh, very cool.
So this is how you build the relief. Now once you have the reliefs created, you would want to be able to, program them on your CNC machine. So you got to export all of these geometries to CAD. So you click on Export Meshes to CAD. So you have export options. So before you export, you can choose, export base and relief as separate meshes, or output base and relief as a single mesh. It'll output the base and the relief as one mesh. And you have additional controls if you want to like decimate it, meaning reduce the number of triangles. During export, you can do all of that stuff. So I'm just going to export them all as one mesh, pick export, and now the relief what we created is exported. You could now go from the art module to the mill module, and then you can program your toolpaths in here. You can select your post processor, whatever post processor that you would like to use in here. I'm just going to pick apt and then specify the workpiece, the stock material. So you can notice that the maximum height we put in was quarter inch. So based on the peaks and valleys, it establishes the maximum height. And now we are ready to program some toolpaths. So we can start with the roughing cut and then go to the finishing. So I'm just going to add a finishing operation in here. We'll start with the parallel finishing. I'll pick the boundary, so I want to keep the cutter inside this area. Specify a tool. I'll grab an 1/8" ball and mill for it. Set the cutting parameters. Specify the step over. Choose the direction of cut, and specify any additional parameters and generate. So this is how we can go from art to part in just a few steps. You can run a verification. So you currently have the mill module to be able to generate your toolpath. So adding the art module will allow you to create these relief operations. You could do raster to vector, and you could do relief operations, and now you can post-process this out to your machine.
Cool.
Any questions so far?
That looks good.
All right. Okay.
Straightforward.
Thank you. So let me go ahead and show you the other example in the art module where you can take an image and turn it into a relief. So that's called create 3D relief. So the first step for that would be to define a project. So I'm going to pick origin and extents, and I'm going to select the origin and extents. I'm going to pick by selecting two corners. So I can specify a smaller project or a bigger project depending on the size I would like to work with, and then I hit generate. So that creates a project workspace. The next step I would like to do here is to create a relief in here, and I'm going to take one of these images. I'm going to pick this dragon image. You can see that the dragon image I have has a very nice contrasting background, which means has a solid background in the back, and then the image is in just one solid color. Or if you have variable colors as well, we can work with it. So you would go into the 3D relief operations in here to create that. So let me go ahead and see that the dialog shows up right here, and you can now set the parameters in here. So you would want to add it to the base relief. You can also invert the images. So the lighter the colors, the more height you're going to get. The darker it gets, it reduces the height. So these are the original image and the grayscale components. You can also invert the colors. You can also adjust the RGB values in here. And if you have a colored image, you can also use the filters to filter out certain information. Now in the parameter edits, you can specify a size for it. I'm going to go pick two corners in here. I'll just place them right inside this area, picking two corners, and I can specify the maximum height for the relief. So in this particular step, I'm going to put in the relief height of, let's say, 300 thousandths. and add it to it. And if you want to contain it, you can also pick containment by going to the Relief Curves tab. Now selecting Generate will actually create a puffed image of the dragon that we imported. And now this is ready for your machining process. So you export this to CAD and you can machine it. If you want to add some borders and if you want to add some stuff around it, you can do that as well. So now when you export it, before you export, you can go to Preferences here. You could select Output the Relief Mesh only, and you can also choose the option to close the base of the planar mesh. So now when I pick OK and export it out, you will notice that it's only exporting the relief mesh and it's capping the base.
Okay.
So there are several different options available for your export. Now if you'd like to mirror it, there's an option to create a mirror. So if you'll make it like a solid object on both sides, you can go ahead and choose mirror with the base mesh. Mirror the base, choose close base and mirror it. So now when you export it out, you'll notice that it's going to create a mirror on both sides.
Where is the export function? I'm not seeing where you're doing that.
Right here, export meshes to CAD.
Oh, okay.
That's right in here. So there are different options. You can set the options before you export it. So this is one of the ways how you can create reliefs. You can also apply textures to it. So if you have a texture bitmap that you'd like to apply, so on this particular part, I could go ahead and choose a second relief operation. So let me go ahead and clear this out here. I'm just going to clear the mesh model out and we can apply a texture to it. Would there be any questions so far, Paul?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I guess with regards to machining, would you want to use parallel finish? So parallel finishing with a ball end mill is kind of where you go, and would you want to do a second pass at like 135?
Yes, I would change the angle for it, and I would definitely do that. So basically, you get a nicer finish. So all of the scalloping that's being left from one cutting direction will automatically be taken care of from when you change the direction of cut.
And would you do roughing at all with art?
I would, depending on how big the part is and if it requires roughing. I would definitely do that.
Okay.
Now here I'm trying to take this image in here and apply it as a texture as the background in here. So I can pick the size of the relief in here. I'm going to pick these two corners that defines the extents of my project, and I'm going to specify like a 15 thousandths height for the base, and I'm going to generate it. So you'll now notice that it creates a pattern, and you can see that can be used like a texture for the background. Now I could use different patterns like a metallic pattern, so you can just basically use any image and give it a height in here, and you can see that the background image shows now the floral pattern that I put in.
Oh, very cool.
And now when you machine it, you will actually see those, because this is not just a planar surface. You have a relief height to it. So I can go back and edit this in here. And if I want to increase the height to, let's say, 50 thousandths, I can change that, generate it. And now if you look at the project, it has that 50 thousandths height to it. And when you export this as a mesh, you can click on Export Meshes to CAD, and there's the relief what you just created.
Oh, awesome.
So this would be a mesh. Is basically it's like an STL format. It's basically created of triangles. The polygon meshes, also known as polygon meshes. Now the next thing we're going to look at is take one of your files and see how we can work on it. All right?
Okay, yeah. If we want to do the complex one, because it sounds like the easy one's going to be pretty basic, just in terms of the carving. But yeah, the complex one, just to see what her little minor shading, how that translates into vectors.
Okay. All right. So I just selected New to create a new workspace in here. Now, do you typically work in inches or do you work in metric units?
Inches.
Okay. All right. So we'll do the raster to vector operation. So I see that you sent us 2 images. So the first one I have over here, I'll just drag it over. So this is the first image, right?
Yeah, we could try that. I did
Okay.
some
So what I would
rough.
also do here is scale, trim this out. So I'm going to use a snipping tool. So this is the only area we were looking to cut, right? So I can just basically clip it to this area. Do you see that, Paul?
Yeah.
And then I can save this out. I'll just do a save in here. And I'm going to save it out as a JPEG file. I'll call it fish1. I'll save it up. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to the raster to vector operations tab, and I'm going to click on create curve from images. I browse to that folder. I'm going to grab this image that we had, and this basically displays the original image and then the black and white. I can hit the invert. It basically flips the colors in here, and you can see that this can help you control the noise ratio by adjusting the threshold on it. Do you see it, Paul?
Yeah.
If you also invert it, and if you go over here, so the darker the colors, the darker ones are going to give you the outline. So we want to invert it, and we can adjust it so that it, it is able to give us a fairly good curve, right? So I basically set it over here because the more I move it here, now you can see there's more noise in the image it's picking up from the background of the image.
All right.
So I'm going to leave it at this setting here. I'll just leave it as about 238, the threshold. In the vector edits, I can specify a size for it. So I can go ahead and click on the size, and I can pick two corners, and I'm going to select the two corners right in here. And I can also choose to maintain an aspect ratio, so it automatically establishes that, and then I'll hit generate. So in this process, it's taking the image and converting it to a vector geometry. So based on the image what you have, it shows all of these noises in here. Do you notice that?
Yeah.
So if you take a look at the image, you're seeing those noises from the image.
Okay.
So it's mapping it to the closest pixel that you have on it. Right, so if you go back in here and you change the threshold, I can go back and edit this. If I reduce the threshold, the less amount of information you're going to see. Or if you can increase the threshold, you'll see more noises on the image. And then you can also control or adjust the resolution in here. I can go from 125 to 150. The finer the resolution, you're basically going through more number of sampling points. So consider resolution as being, for every square inch you have 150 squares, right? So that's what the resolution is. If you consider a square inch, you're basically having 150 squares inside the square inch. So that's what the resolution defines.
Okay.
Now once you have this in here, you may have to do a lot of cleanup in here because of these curves, the way they are drawn. You can look at the image right here. So all of these, it's just showing up right there based on mapping to the pixel.
Okay.
Right. So in this particular case, the outline is the only one that's possibly, which is, which can be retained, and everything else you may have to clean it up, right? So you would want to go ahead and export this as curves. Now, what would happen if you slacken up the resolution? So if I put in like 50 and not do any smoothing on it, generate it, you'll notice it shows even more broken up into curves as you see it. So these parameters can be used to control, make it as better, as smoother as possible. So the higher the resolution, the better it's going to be for the curves. But then again, it's an expense of time and based on the sampling that you put in. Right?
Yeah, well, this is a fourth grade project with drawings from children, so it'll be nice to pick up some of the imperfections, I think. So
Okay. So
know
now
the
I would
sheet.
export this to CAD. So it's basically converting these to curves as you notice it here. It's converting it to curves in Visual CAD. It's outputting them as curves. Now, do you use any other CAD application in addition to Visual CAD for creating your design work?
Yeah, I have a GeoMagic or what is it?
Okay, okay. So now you're also seeing some points in here. So the reason is I have display of uh, start points and direction enable. That's why you're seeing those points. But if I turn it off, you'll not see those points anymore. So these are basically curves. You can basically remove these or delete them out. And you can also go back and redraw some of these in here. So if you'd like to recreate it, one of the things I could use is called NURBS curve, and I can kind of trace along these curves in here to get and if you want to make it more better perfection of the curve, you can actually go kind of snap near it. So quickly use it as a reference guideline to create this nice NURBS curve around the model, right? So that's something you can do in visual art once you have this converted, right? So you have a
Okay.
curved outline. So I'm basically going in here and creating this nice little boundary around it to remove a lot of these imperfections. Rather than having to do a delete, trim, and merge and all of these, I could basically use these tools that are available. So NURBS curve is a very nice tool in here to go ahead and recreate some of these sections in here. So I could be recreating the entire section because it was drawn by hand, and because of the thickness that you had for the the pencil, it's basically grabbing all of that into like a double line, right?
Okay.
So here I can go into this point and I can basically follow along this contour in here. And now once you have these created, you can program your toolpaths, engraving. If that's what you would like to accomplish on these, you can program an engraving toolpath with it. So I just created the NURBS curve, and I can take that and place it on a different layer in here. I can pick that NURBS curve I just created right there, and I can change that from the layer that it's currently on to the new layer. So now you can see that the curve what you created is an outline of that, right?
Okay, that's good.
And now I can also go back in here and maybe recreate some of these areas using some of these tools. Because I see that there's a lot of noise in here, so if you engrave it, you're going to end up with all of those when you create an engraving operation. So you could also take a NURBS curve in here and basically follow on these curve sections, right? And then you can probably
How did you
recreate these.
new layer, or how did you assign it to a new layer?
Yeah, so if you go into the Layers Manager, which can be accessed down from the status bar right here, when you click on it, it pulls up this Layer Manager. And in the Layer Manager, you can click on New Layer. When you click on New Layer, it automatically sets the new layer to be active and visible. So anything that you draw or create will automatically go on the new layer. But before I create the new layer, I actually drew the first original NURBS curve on the default layer. So I wanted to move that once it was created to a new layer. So I basically select the object, which in this case is this curve, and I go into properties. You can display the properties dialog by selecting the properties toolbar at the status bar, or you can right click and go to properties, and now you can change it from the layer that's on to a different one.
Okay.
You can move objects from one layer to the other. So now once you've changed it, now I can go ahead and also toggle the visibility of the layer off. So now this is ready for toolpath. So I'm going to go into the mill module in here, define my workpiece. So I could also draw a rectangle that kind of represents my size of my sheet, 8 by 5, or you want to go 8 by 6, whatever size, or 9 by 6. You define it, and then you program your toolpaths. You could go into defining your stock material, give it a height, 3/4 inch, and then select 2-axis engraving. I can select all of these curves, specify a tool, a 45-degree engraving cutter, give it a depth in here, 100 thousandths, generate. So we now have the engraving toolpath. You can go to simulate and select play.
Okay.
There's the cut pattern. So if the image that you're working with is not very clean, then this is something you may have to consider like kind of recreating some of those sections or portions of it, and you can retain some of the sections.
Okay, no, that looks great. So can you just try real quick just to see what the fidelity of that more complex image is?
Sure, we'll do that. Okay, let me go in.
That generates, and then I think I have a good enough view. I think I'm gonna.
Okay, let me go ahead and save this out here. I'm going to do a save as. I'll call this a fish. And let's go ahead and take a look at the other one. All right, so this is the other image, right, that we're looking at?
Yeah.
Okay. So
we can get it scanned, so I know that's going to have a lot of like gray backgrounds on it. But
so do you want to just use that for like an engraving application?
Yeah, because that's going to be the first project. So if you could just see what kind of noise that generates.
Okay, we can do that.
I'd like to just see that.
Okay, so you can see that it's so dark in the background, right?
Okay.
So if I go in here, so I can adjust the threshold, and you can see as I try to move it, it's darkening it out because there's several dark spots in here. So if you have it on a solid background, so if I grab this in here, and I can specify a size, and I can do a resolution of, let's say, 150, generate it. So this is going to throw in a lot of curves into it because it's not the image that you have here, it shows that it's not very, the background is not, clear. So that's why it's adding all of those noises. There's some shadow and stuff like that on it, right? So if you can make the background transparent or eliminate a lot of these, then if you have a solid background, then it's going to give you a much better result.
Okay.
So it's still processing it, and you can see this is what it produces right in here.
But that is really actually good enough. So
okay.
Yeah, that looks like
it'll... And then you export it out. So once it's exported, it creates curves for each of these. You can see it's creating, and then you can basically trace them out if you'd like to trace it out. And then if you just want to engrave these, you can engrave them as well.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Well, I think I have everything I need to do is.
So with the demo, you will be able to view the relief or view the raster to vector, but you can't export it in the demo mode. So you can't export it as curves, but you can actually see it on your graphics screen.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, that sounds good. And then make sure to forward me the link to the YouTube video. That would be good to know.
Sure. It will probably be maybe a week or two to have it processed and then upload it, but I can try to just send you the raw video that we have. You can download it to your computer and watch it.
That would be good. So one thing, can you view my screen real quick?
Let me do that here. Give me one moment.